Welcome, everyone. Lovely to see many of you again. Thank you for joining us for our distinguished keynote speakers. We are continuing our day of inspiring speakers with two distinguished AFSers who are going to share their AFS journey and the journey of their careers and insights since, and their insights on the importance to U.S. foreign policy and global relations of the programs we're all engaged in together. I'll just give you a little introduction, which will just skim the surface of both Patrick Mendis and Dominique Reichenbach and their background, but they're going to expound and give us a rich understanding of their journeys, and I think we're all going to enjoy it. And then they're going to give us a little bit of a taste of, and some thoughts around, their article, which many of you may have seen or and read in preparation for this evening, which is called Students Can Save America's Foreign Policy Agenda, which appeared in the Harvard International Review on February 8th of this year. My name is Carrie Dooley. I am part of our leadership team at AFS-USA. I am privileged to have been an AFS student with a Congress Bundestag scholarship in 1985, which happened to be the second year of that program, which is still going strong. I am so pleased to have my fellow returnees, Patrick Mendis and Dominique Reichenbach, here tonight. Patrick Mendis is a recipient of the Benjamin Franklin Award and Meritorious Honor Award of the U.S. Department of State. He has recently served as a distinguished visiting professor of Sino-American relations at the Yenching Academy of Peking University in Beijing, and a Taiwan Fellow of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as a distinguished visiting professor of global affairs at the National Chengchi University in Taipei, and currently is a distinguished visiting professor of culture and diplomacy at the Chinese Culture University in Taiwan, and joins us from Taipei very early in his mornings. Thank you for making the time so early to join us, Dr. Mendis. And Dominique Reichenbach is a recipient of the National Security Language Initiative for Youth scholarship, and she went to Dayang, China, implemented by AFS. She later received the Benjamin Gilman and David Boren scholarship and served as a research intern and teaching assistant at National Chengchi University in Taipei. She currently serves as a China news analyst. Both began their distinguished careers in international affairs after participating in their programs, and they are ready to share with us tonight that journey. And at the end, we'll have some time for questions. If we don't get to all the questions that you may have, we'll circle back with both Patrick and Dominique and try to send a follow-up after this. So Patrick, may I turn the floor over to you and ask you to get us started.
Thank you very much, Carrie, and thank you, AFS, for inviting both Dominic and I for this event. We are very honored, and what I would like to do is talk about my story and how I started my journey from Sri Lanka to Minnesota in the United States, and then from Minnesota to how I end up in Washington, D.C. So this all started with AFS. So that is the story. And then I will end up with saying that how I met my good friend and Dominic while we were working in National Chengchi University. So I'm very honored to have her call a friend and also extraordinarily gifted person who also helped me on my writing and editing and advising me certain things. So I'm very honored to be part of this wonderful community of AFS. So let me begin to talk about how I end up in Minnesota. You probably notice my Scandinavian accent and a little bit you betcha, you darn right, and that kind of language that I learned from being in Minnesota in the United States. And matter of fact, I learn to speak English in Minnesota. So I don't have a Sri Lankan British English or the Queen English. I have a Minnesotan English with the Scandinavian accent. So there, I came to America to AFS in 1978. I have my orientation program in Stanford University in California. That's where I learned how to use the fork and spoon. And if somebody said, say hello or hi, just say hi back to them. So this is the first time I learned to say hi. Don't ask any question. I said, what is hi? That means hello. So I learned my 1 week orientation, then I flew to Chicago. And from then Chicago, I had a bus trip to Fargo, North Dakota or Minnesota, Moorhead, Fargo area. So then I met my AFS family. So that's how I end up in Minnesota. So I grew up in second capital of Sri Lanka. It goes back to the 11th century. It is called the medieval capital of Polonnaruwa. It is a UNESCO triangle and recognized as one of the first UNESCO sites in the world. And this capital still is known for its Buddhist heritage. And I was born into a Catholic father who grew up in the West Coast near Colombo. And my mother was a descendant of the last king of Sri Vikrama Rajasinghe. And they met as a pen pal. And they had, she converted into Catholicism and they married in a Catholic church and then later became a Buddhist because of the environmental reason in the historic city of Polonnaruwa, which was the Buddhist capital. So I was born there in Polonnaruwa. And as a child, I was very sick. And after 7 months later, and one of the Buddhist monk predicted that I either be a scholarly Buddhist monk or leave my home family or leave the country. So because of that reason, my paternal grandparents raised me because they are who are Catholic. They didn't want me to be a Buddhist monk. But I grew up in a Buddhist environment, Buddhist and Catholic environment. So I grew up in this historic city, both 5 days going to Buddhist school and 2 days I spend my time with the Catholic priest who are living with my grandparents' place. So from there, I went to this village school, which is still is a village. And then I was also known as a kind of king, one of the king in Sri Lanka at that time, King Parakkambahu, because I tend to stay straight. And merely because I grew up in an academic environment and also being in the police cadet and army cadet corps, where I was in the high school. It's similar to ROTC in the United States. So there, because of my prediction or the horoscope by my Buddhist mother came up with, and I was raised by my paternal grandparents, and I called them my mother and father until I became an AFS scholar at the late teenagers, and my parents, whom I call uncle and aunt, tried to sign the papers, and then they found out my real parents are somewhere else. So my grandparents actually were my grandparents, even though I call them mother and father. So from there, I came to Minnesota. As you can see the picture, it is in the local newspaper. And on the right side is when I was a police cadet corps, I became a base commander, and that actually led me to selected as one of the AFSs out of 100,000 applicants. After 100,000, they selected 25, only 9 of them came to America. So it was a very competitive process in Sri Lanka in that time. And when I came to Minnesota, I stayed with my second AFS family is my father was Bill Johnson, and mother was Dorothy Johnson. She is still living, and I actually talked to her yesterday with my American sister. You can see my American sister, Kristen, on the right side, and it is about a few years ago that we found this article in my bedroom downstairs. So this, I became a part of them, and I pretty much winterized Minnesotan. You can imagine I came from Sri Lanka, very, very, very hot climate, and now I am learning to see snow and part of this family, and I call them mom and dad and my big sister. And in fact, I was the best man in my sister's wedding in Williston, North Dakota. So pretty much I have two sisters and I'm the only son they have. They pretty much adopted me as their own son. At my prom in the high school, I met one of the high school friend and Shaylee Adams. I'm still in touch with her. She's in Florida. And also I still stay in touch with my other high school friends in Perm community. Matter of fact, I talk to them pretty much every week. And on the left side, you can see my best friends I went to their weddings. I was the best man in my Jeff Haviland's wedding, and he was in my wedding, and so forth. And the middle picture is the one of the American diplomat who was stationed in the Sri Lanka and came to help me to come into the Minnesota for the second time when the war started in Sri Lanka. And then the community got together and raised money, the Rotary Club and the Lion Club and all the churches, including the Lutheran Church and the Catholic Church. And they sold the pancakes and raised money and asked me to come back. So I came on the second time in 1983 after my graduation from the Sri Lankan University. So then where I went to work in the Minnesota legislature, then I pretty much met my American father, whom I called, he was father to my family, and my children call him Uncle Ed, and he was the legendary Minnesotan in the Minnesota legislature. So he passed away about 10 years ago this last month. And then there I also met with Vice President Walter Mondale. In fact, I met Vice President Walter Mondale when I was returning from AFS experience in Perm, Minnesota, back in Washington, D.C. Then later on, I met him several occasions, and we exchanged gifts, books, and we often talk to each other. So there I met my former mentor, Ambassador Harlan Cleveland, who is the Dean of the Humphrey School on the left. And I graduated from the Humphrey School in 1986, and then went into the PhD at the University of Minnesota, specialized on public policy, geography, economics, and international relations. So there, my American father on the right side was at the legislature. They had the birthday graduation party for me. So then from there, I get involved in political process because I was told if our democracy to work, you must be participant in a democratic process. I think you can see that my fellow AFS Dominique also engaged in similar activities in Arizona as well. So here, then I met with Tip O'Neill, who came to Washington, Minnesota, and also I was in the presidential campaign for Mondale Pereiro presidential campaign 1984. I met with the Geraldine Ferraro, and then also with Vice President Walter Mondale. So then while I was in Minnesota, and Sri Lankan president appointed me as the youth ambassador to the United Nations. And he also came from very poor rural area, very underprivileged family, and he considered himself a self-made man. And he learned about me, and then he appointed me to represent Sri Lanka at the United Nations as the Sri Lanka's youth ambassador. So then I had the privilege to meet with the another exchange student who happened to be the Zimbabwe president, Paul Lusaka. And then I also received a UN Medal for International Year of Youth. This was the first International Year, 1986. So then afterward, I returned to work for Senator Rudy Bosworth, whom I met on my way back to Washington after my AFS experience. And then later on, I served in his staff in 1980s during the Ronald Reagan time. So it was a kind of unbelievable experience. Previously I was an AFS exchange student, meeting him in my other fellow AFS, Yadira Marte from Dominican Republic. And now I'm back in the US and working for the senator I met many years prior to that. So then when from Minnesota, I went to work in Washington. There I met Senator Richard Lugar. I understand that you have a Lugar program at the Humphrey program, and the Muskie program and the Fulbright program, all are named after the former senators. And then I met with Senator Tim Kaine, former presidential candidate from Hillary Clinton, and also my dear friend, Senator Chris Van Hollen from Minnesota, from Maryland. He actually grew up in Sri Lanka because his father was the US ambassador there. So Chris and I has a kindred spirit in his study program, internationalization and international education as well. And on the bottom, on the left side, you can see the Brian Atwood, who wrote the foreword to my book. He was the former chairman of the AFS International, and he was the former dean of the Humphrey School. He wrote the foreword to that book. And then another distinguished former exchange student is on the right side, the dean of the Harvard Kennedy School. And he also been one of my professors when I was at the Kennedy School. And then during these years, while I was in the US, working at the University of Minnesota or teaching at Maryland or Yale or Columbia or being at the Kennedy School, I stay in touch with my fellow AFSs back in Sri Lanka. One time, my friend Nimal and rest of the AFS colleague organized the event, asked me to give a talk about US foreign policy and the founding fathers. So at that point, I was in Sri Lanka and met with all the AFSs, and this is the one of the group that I'm still in touch with. I'm pretty sure they are listening somewhere in Sri Lanka, and some are in Australia, and others are in New Zealand, and a few of them are in Europe as well. So I'm staying in touch with them as well. This bottom line is everything is started with the AFS that opened up where I work as a water buffaloes and went to work with the milking cows in Minnesota, and then end up in Washington, DC, and working with different kind of behaviors that we find it with other kind of people around the world. So because Washington is pretty much is the international city, you will see many international people. Even my neighbors are coming from, my neighbor is actually French and British, and the other neighbor is Lebanese, and other neighbors are from different countries. So you can see I end up in an international community, and I feel like a home, because all these things happen because AFS. And then from there, I also ventured into China. I taught in 27 Chinese universities and academies, and traveled all the 34 provinces of China, and all the all the 50 states in the US. So this exposure all came from the AFS, because AFS open your mind. You are just not just a citizen of one country, you are belong to the world belong to you. That kind of spirit that I think I shared with my friend Dominic, and that's how that kindred spirit when we first met, and we kind of directly connect. There is some kind of amazing chemistry there with the AFSs, because they have a world view of we are one, we can come from anywhere, and they can be one. That is the American notion of the founding fathers, which I think is very important to know. This is the only country in the world that people can come from anywhere. You can become an American. So if you go to Japan or China, you never become a Japanese or Chinese. But America is unique in the sense, And I think AFS is following that American founding fathers vision of out of many, we are one, e pluribus unum. And that one, I say thank you to AFS, which they also following the American tradition of e pluribus unum, out of many, we are one. Thank you very much. I give yield to the floor to my dear friend, Dominique.
Thank you, Patrick. Dominic.
Awesome, thank you. Let
Turn
me
the
just share
floor
my
to
screen
you.
here. Awesome. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. So thank you so much for inviting us to be here. I want to, join Patrick in thanking you. It's an honor to be here speaking with you, and also to be writing and learning alongside Patrick as I sort of start my career in government and moving forward. My story is obviously very different than Patrick's. But I also was an AFS scholar. I received the national, it's a mouthful, but the National Security Language Initiative for Youth Scholarship to study abroad in Doyang, China in the summer of 2014 on an AFS implemented program. So I'm from Cave Creek, Arizona. I grew up in an affluent neighborhood in a very nice school district, but I was raised by a single mother, and we lived, I think, in the smallest house in the whole neighborhood. But I'm glad that I have grown up there because it gave me many opportunities throughout my life. So the school that I went to was a K through 12, hosted a K through 12 Spanish immersion program. It was the first of its kind in the state of Arizona, and I was the very first group to start going through it. So we were the guinea pigs with, kind of experimenting what works and what doesn't. But you'll notice as I talk about my experience, a lot of it is very based on language learning. So I started learning foreign languages from a very young age. As I said, in kindergarten, I started in a Spanish immersion program where half the day we learned all of our subjects in Spanish, all of our textbooks, all instruction was completely immersive in Spanish. And then the other half of the day was English. And each year we sort of rotated as far as what subjects were taught in Spanish. I often blame the fact that I'm not the greatest at math on the fact that some of my math classes were taught in Spanish, because I was way more interested in learning Spanish vocabulary than I was multiplication tables and whatnot. But yeah, so this was sort of my upbringing, my background. And as I progressed, I got proficient, with advanced proficiency, professional proficiency in Spanish. And by the time I got to high school, I was ready for another challenge and decided to take on French as well. So I studied French. I took some classes over the summer to get caught up to my counterparts at school, and then joined in on the honors French courses. French and Spanish have a lot of similarities, so I was sort of able to jump into that pretty quickly. And because we were the first group of students to go through this new program in Arizona, there was a big push from our world language coordinators and our principals to sort of expand the model of our schools into other languages and other school districts around Arizona. So early on, I kind of became a sort of advocate for foreign language learning. We went several times to the Arizona State Senate to speak on behalf of a bill. It was SB 1242, which would give more funding for sort of immersion language programs in the state of Arizona. And they've now started a French and a Mandarin immersion program as well in different school districts. So the nice thing about going to school in Arizona, if you live within the zones, you can kind of pick which language you want to enroll your kids in, and then pick your house based on, pick your neighborhood based on that, and send them to school to learn Mandarin, French, or Spanish. And it was successful. Obviously, we prepared a speech. My friend Trace and I, who I've grown up with since kindergarten, spent all night preparing a speech for the Senate meeting in Spanish, French, and English to kind of show our language abilities and what it's done for us. And because I was so involved in learning foreign languages, I had many friends and counselors and teachers throughout school who knew that about me, and then heard about the NISLE scholarship program and encouraged me to apply. So I did, and funny enough, in the middle photo there, we're at the Great Wall. And that's the friend who encouraged me to go ahead and apply. And we both put our names in and both ended up being accepted. So both of us from a small town in Cave Creek ended up going to China. He went to Chengdu and I went to Deyang, but we were on the same orientation program together and then kind of parted ways. I became very close with my host family there. It was a very exciting moment for our school district that's always trying to push for more Spanish, French, or Mandarin immersion programs. So they had us do some radio interviews, some magazine interviews to kind of talk about the experience. Our town, Cave Creek, is real small. It's about 8,000 people. We're really close to Phoenix, Arizona and Scottsdale, Arizona, which are much larger, but we, it's a small town feel. So it's pretty exciting to send 2 students all the way over to China. But I became very close to my host sister and all the cousins, and it was almost like more siblings, but cousins and nieces and nephews on their side. I don't speak to them every day quite like Patrick does, but I speak to them a couple times a year. And I made some great connections with the other AFSers that I was there with. And we have traveled around the US to see each other's hometowns and taken them horseback riding around Arizona. So it's been some long-lasting connections. I honestly couldn't imagine where my career would be without the AFS program. Before I went to China, I spoke absolutely no Chinese, could not even say hello. So it was a bit of an adjustment, but I came back and I was able to test at an intermediate high. And because we had the first group of Spanish immersion program students graduating in May of 2015 from high school, there was a push to get a seal of biliteracy approved for the state of Arizona. So it's essentially a seal that can go on students' diplomas if they pass an ACTFL test at a certain level, and they put a seal on your diploma, and you can send that to sort of university admissions office and put it on your resume. That says that this student has passed reading, listening, speaking exams at a certain level. So we were the first. They approved it just in time for us to graduate in May of 2015, and we were the first group. We're the first school in Arizona to get it approved. So the first 41 graduating seniors from Cactus Shadows to have seals of biliteracy on our diplomas. And I was able to test in French, Spanish, and Mandarin and receive 3 seals of biliteracy, or effectively a seal of quadriliteracy. So first in the state of Arizona, and I don't think anyone else has had a seal of quadriliteracy yet. So I think it's the only one still, but I'm sure there's people coming up the pipe to take that title away. And then my teachers were all very excited, obviously, that I showed such an interest in studying foreign languages. So they encouraged me to do the Star Talk program after I graduated from high school, and I did. I would describe the Star Talk program as the best experience someone can have if they cannot study abroad for financial reasons. It's like a 2-week immersive experience where they bring in cultural activities, and it's completely immersive in the language. So it kind of gives you a small sense of what it's like to study abroad if you just don't have the capability to go abroad. So I did that, and I met all the faculty for the Chinese flagship program at Arizona State University and decided to go ahead and enroll in that program. And as part of the flagship program, you are required to study abroad for a semester and then a full year. And I think, as AFSers, we can all agree that that is not necessarily a requirement, but something that we enjoy as part of the program. So I went after some other funding to be able to go on these study abroad programs. So for the summer, I received a Benjamin A. Gilman scholarship to return to Beijing, China, where I studied abroad with the ACC, which is Associated Colleges of China. And again, it was a completely Mandarin immersive experience, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday classes, and then cultural excursions around Beijing over the weekends. I had a great time there. It was definitely a lot of work, but it helped get me to the proficiency level that I'm at now. And then later I was looking for some new adventures, but still studying Mandarin. So I ended up doing the flagship capstone year in Taipei, Taiwan, instead of returning to China. And I received a David L. Boren scholarship to do that. And it was essentially the first semester was I was taking classes at National Taiwan University with other Taiwanese students in classes taught only in Chinese from National Taiwan University professors. I wrote a thesis in Chinese. And then the second semester, I did an internship at National Zhengzhi University, which is where I met Patrick. And throughout my time, in college, I did some internships at National Defense University and also American Foreign Policy Council, where I worked on some China-specific policy projects. And I was able to meet, like Patrick, people who are very high up in their careers as China experts, and sort of, took me under their wings to really show me the ropes as far as what they were working on. And I don't think, without AFS, which sort of snowballed into then a Gilman Scholarship and a Boren Scholarship, I wouldn't have had the experience or the language skills necessary to really work on some of those projects. I've done a lot of projects on sort of the Belt and Road Initiative and China's Belt and Road Initiative and trade between China and other countries. And so kind of using both Spanish and Mandarin language skills to analyze the changing trade relationships, economic relationships with the US, China, and Latin American countries. And again, I feel like, those internship experiences are something that I would not have ever been selected for had I not done the AFS program and then study abroad programs from there. And of course, at National Zhengzhi University, I met Patrick. And well, I guess backtrack a little bit. After I came back, I also, just like Patrick, worked as a presidential campaign canvasser. I think anyone who's in politics has some sort of experience as a canvasser or a volunteer, at least on some form of a campaign. So Mi Familia Vota is an organization that really seeks to bring the Latino electorate to full participation and get the Latino community registered to vote and participating in politics. So our goal, we help with legal permanent residents who are applying for citizenship, and then also just anyone who's in the Latino community and a US citizen who wants to register to vote but hasn't yet, kind of assist in that process and explain the electoral process and how it works. And so my job was getting people registered to vote and then helping with those citizenship applications. And I think, Patrick and I both agree that whenever there's sort of a new 4 years, a reset of 4 years of a new president, there's kind of the renewed sense of, okay, well, we can start setting some new agendas because there's new budgets that are written and new policy goals from each administration. And so we felt that it was a great time to start writing op-eds. And so we wrote some while I was still working at the National Zhengzhi University, as well as after I returned home to the US. And we thought that our Harvard International Review article on, students can save America's foreign policy agenda was really topical for the time, because we knew, obviously the new administration will be deciding on some budgets for State Department and which affect ultimately funding for study abroad programs like NISLE or Boren or Fulbright or any of the number of study abroad programs. So this was kind of the time that we decided to put our thoughts, our perspective out there on how important really it is that the work that volunteers at places like AFS or staff members at AFS, as well as Fulbright or the Humphrey program or Boren, Gilman, any of those, how important it is that volunteers are recruiting and that we have host families who are hosting students and supporting students on programs, because that can snowball into a career like Patrick's within the government that really has a tangible effect on international relations. Or like mine, which is just starting out. I'm currently working at a tech company as a China news analyst, but will soon in the next few weeks be moving to Washington, DC to start a career as an international affairs specialist within the government. So I'm very excited for that. And again, I think that, you know, it never really would have come to fruition without AFS. As I said, I didn't speak a lick of Mandarin before I went on my AFS program. So I can't imagine where I would be now, because all my jobs and internship experiences and sort of professional experiences have been revolved around Mandarin translating, China policy analysis. So I'm forever grateful for the AFS program. I think as many of you can probably relate to. And just grateful to be here speaking with you guys. And I'd love to turn the floor back over to Patrick to sort of talk a little bit more about our Harvard article.
Thank you very much from that. Carrie, you want me to talk about Harvard article, or what do you think?
Sure. Well, I thank you both, by the way, for sharing your perspective on your journey and giving us a little background about where it took you next. And I think it'd be really interesting for us, you know, you both have a background in advocacy, maybe think a little, you know, help us think through or give us some advice. How can we help our, you know, leaders in Congress and elsewhere to think about what place international exchange has in developing the infrastructure for diplomacy and that sort of diplomacy muscle in the United States?
You know, just like Dominic just mentioned earlier, what is boiled down to in the US Congress or America as a whole to the budget, the national budget. Budget is not just the numbers. It represents our values, who we are. And if you cut down the budget in certain program and increase the budget in some other programs or the defense, it tells what America stands for, what our values are. For example, you probably seen in that article that Dominic and I wrote during the previous administration of Donald Trump administration, his Office of Budget and Management, OMB, Office of Management and Budget, they cut down the requested, US Congress requested $730 million. But then the OMB in the White House wanted to cut it down to 400 million, which means reducing almost 50% of our budget for international education and study abroad program. It tells us what our national values are. And then at the same time, they increase the defense budget. So our budget is the reflection of who we are as a nation. So I think US Congress in that respect admired and know the value of exchange program, because America was founded on the premise that we are a global nation and it welcomes everybody. All the founding fathers has their connection to the European countries, and they envision the country to be a global nation. Now then, First World War, that the AFS started as an ambulance service, and then they thought, founders thought, we can avoid another war if we have a better intercultural understanding with the other nations. We can avoid the Second World War. But unfortunately, we ended up in the Second World War, and then after which, then America realized we needed to have more exchange programs, and then President Dwight Eisenhower started the people-to-people exchange program, which I happened to be in the Soviet Union on that one in Eisenhower people-to-people exchange program to teach the former KGB officers in St. Petersburg in Leningrad State University in 1991 summer. So you can see then afterward, William Fulbright came up with the Fulbright program, then the Humphrey program and Muskie program and the Lugar program and the David Boren program. This one, our US Congress recognizes the value of intercultural program. If you have a better understanding, we do not go into another wars. So in essence, then what we need to do is to bring greater awareness with the American public and to bring our Congress, in fact, the US Congress not many of the significant number of our congressional leaders and their staff were from exchange students. For example, that you can see the Senator Tim Kaine was a former exchange student of Central America, and Senator Richard Lugar was exchange student to England, and even Brian Atwood from exchange student. And everybody, you can see the leadership that provided America to be a global nation, a global leader. We need to have this kind of mindset. We cannot have a leader in the world unless we know about other countries and other cultures. But in order to get there, we recognize, the US Congress recognized that we need to increase the budget. You probably remember after the 9/11, we went to war with Iraq and Afghanistan. And soon after that one, President George W. Bush increased the budget of the ECA, Education and Cultural Affairs Bureau. At that time, I was the Secretariat Director of the ECA under Secretary Colin Powell. The increase of the budget is to, after the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, we need to rebuild it. In order to rebuild it, we need to have exchange program. Even the Laura Bush started the Laura Bush Scholarship with the UNESCO. You can see there is a mindset in order to rebuild the world. We need to have a people, because the mind is the forerunner of everything. Unless you address that mind, if you don't develop that kind of mindset, just like our founding fathers had the enlightened mindset, just like Benjamin Franklin to Thomas Jefferson to Thomas Paine to James Madison. Those people have this enlightened mindset because they were exposed to other countries, because they were, whether it is France or in England, when they came back, they have this idea of the new nation have to be a global nation. I think our congressional leaders and many people in the state legislatures realize the better understanding with other countries is better for the America, and that in order to have a leadership. So therefore, this program like AFS, which is very important in that sense, because you bring the young people, teenagers, it's the formative years to another culture, you are exposed into that one. For example, you can see my American wife of 30 plus years. She was an exchange student from Minnesota to Japan, and she speaks Japanese, and she grew up in Okita, is a little town in Shikoku Island at the southernmost island. When I was teaching to the American military in the Pacific Command in Japan and South Korea, I went and with my family to visit her family in 2000. So this kind of cultural exchanges happened because we had that AFS kind of mindset. I think bringing the young people, teenagers at formative years into another country, another culture, make a huge difference than any other programs. For example, like Fulbrighters, they bring in university student. At that time, their mind is pretty much formulated. But if you bring in the young people, like teenagers like myself, and especially in my case, I didn't speak the language. And I have to learn everything, if starting with the rice and curry to mashed potatoes and beef and gravy in Minnesota. And
Right.
Rather than using the hand to eat, you need to learn to use the spoon and fork. So this kind of exchange program make people even humble to learn how other people live, and you also have a personal growth. So all these things begin to work if our congressional leaders who understand the value of having knowledge about other countries and other cultures and the languages, just like Dominic is blessed to have that kind of skill and talent to
Very
bring
impressive,
into
right?
America.
The
So I think that's
quadrilingual
what we need to
American.
bring into the Congress.
Absolutely. And so, I appreciate your reference to, the sort of post 9/11 era and the reaction or the outpouring of understanding that was, sparked by that to get to know that there was a deficit in our knowledge of, especially, the Muslim world. I wonder if, reflecting on your work now in China, Dominic, your your reflections and your work now as a news analyst, if you have some thoughts about, sort of the direction of U.S.-China relations and the work that we need to do from a public diplomacy point of view, from a citizen diplomacy point of view, to kind of incorporate those lessons and keep, sort of temper down some of the hot
Tensions.
yeah.
So I'll stop the screen share now so that we can join. Yeah, so I mean, that is, I think, the question of the next 4 years, especially, is sort of the future of China-US relations. And I would say that right now, many Americans don't know much about China. And I think that's part of, what history we choose to focus on in our education systems is still very European centric. So we don't necessarily focus on the history of Asian countries or otherwise. And so there's a lot of misinformation out there just on a citizen to citizen level about what life is like in China. So you hear, communism, and whatever your opinions and thoughts are on communism is, that's kind of your or many Americans' understanding of China. And so I think, and I think that sometimes translates to the same way with policymakers and senators and lawmakers who just truly aren't that informed on what life is like in China and what, the Chinese government represents and what the Chinese culture represents. And whether you agree with, their government practices or not, we still have a responsibility to work with the Chinese government in international relations. And so I think the challenge is, and sort of the goal for the future is to get, and I think there's many senators that have said the same thing, is to get more students coming up the pipeline who are familiar with sort of Chinese culture, Chinese language, because anymore it's very hard to have a career in international relations or even politics without being familiar with some region of the world. And so especially for obviously US-China policy, you'd need a background in China-Taiwan affairs. So I think, the focus and the goal should be really getting more students up through the pipeline of understanding Chinese culture, so that way when they become, when they start out their careers, like I'm just now starting out mine, they have a firm grasp of, and obviously, I don't know everything there is to know about Chinese culture, because wow, what a amazing place it really is, and so much to learn, but who at least have a background and have been there and have met Chinese citizens. And my understanding of China is not just what I hear on the news, but personal experiences of actually having met and stayed with a Chinese family. So I think that's the challenge. And I think as far as, senators now who maybe just don't know that much, I think it's so important to send delegations of our senators there, their government representatives here, so that way we can have sort of that more people to people connection that I think is really reinforced by international education programs.
Yeah, and I think you're pointing to, an area where there probably is quite a lot of room to expand the educational and cultural affairs writ by expanding the number of Americans that go abroad. One of the things that I think, you both touched on is the importance of sort of, not the importance, it's not more important than another time in life, but it can be extremely impactful and transformative. What is it about, that experience in the teenage years in particular that sort of differentiates your experience and sort of makes a difference in some of the later experiences you've had and the direction of your careers because of that?
Go ahead, Dominic.
Yeah, so like I said, I mean, I grew up in a fairly affluent community that had some of these, I'm very grateful that they had these Spanish immersion type programs that sort of opened my eyes from a young age to a greater worldview. But, and there are many, obviously, school districts that don't have that. And so the ability to kind of go on a study abroad program and open your eyes as a teenager and see, you know, this is how people live in this part of the world, or this is how the, you know, politics works, or this is how culture works, or this is how eating habits work, like as basic as how you dress and how you eat, you know, can have a huge impact on your life. And so I think that being able to see that from a young age and sort of travel out on your own without parents is another big one, and sort of be immersed in, especially if you're with a host family, be immersed in another family and sort of become part of their family, just really opens your eyes to another part of the world and how other people live. And then every time you hear something about that country in the news, you know, you maybe understand sort of the political situation, or you understand whatever is being talked about in the news at a deeper level because you've been there and experienced it yourself, apart from just what you're seeing in the media.
Patrick, do you have some thoughts on?
Well, my background is completely different. I mean, I could not imagine that the child who grew up with the water buffaloes and chicken and 3 acres of rice field, carrying waters from the well, and to living in a Buddhist and Christian world, coming to Colombo, even to the capital, is a big deal. That's the first time I went to Colombo to my AFS interview. And that's the first time I went on a train. I never seen a plane before, because in my part of the country, the plane doesn't go that way. And when I was growing up, I first saw the motorcycle when I was 16 years old. And I started to wear slippers when I was 17 years old. Before that on, I go to school barefoot, and gravel roads, and we didn't have electricity. You know, I mean, it is a complete change to come into here and to work in the State Department and going to the White House. I could not imagine that kind of transformation can make by one program. But this program, the inspiration came actually from a Peace Corps volunteer in the late 1960s. My grandparents who raised me hosted a Peace Corps volunteer. I think she's from New Hampshire, and then later poet exchange student from Iowa. They came and stayed with my grandparents for only a few days. And I remember the Peace Corps volunteer actually looks like, I can have a little image. It's just like Dominique. And I remember going her, touching her skin and seeing, oh, she's very white. I never seen a white person, and blonde hair and blue eyes and so forth. That's the inspiration I got. You know, someday I wanted to go to America, like this young girl came into as a Peace Corps volunteer to my village. And then we, one weekend, actually we rode the water buffaloes, you know, jump into the water buffaloes. You know, this inspiration came in. I wanted to someday go into America, wanted to be like her. So those things can happen because you had the Peace Corps program. Then I happened to be an AFS and many other students around the world and coming to America. And because there is some kind of inspiration, this program can have a domino effect for others to change the world.
One thing leads to another, one person's experience leads to another, that ripple effect that I think we've talked about in a lot of fora here.
Yes.
That each of us does make a difference, right? You know, everyone who's engaged in these programs, everyone who participates, host families, you know, students, and we pay it forward, hopefully. So both of you are doing that. Is there, when you think about, you know, when you reflect back on your experiences, and you know, you talked, Patrick, about, you know, the Peace Corps volunteer who made a difference, who was that catalyst to send you on your experience, and Dominique, you also talked about your friend who encouraged you, you know, to participate. Is there someone that during the experience, or some person that, you know, now you reflect on, oh, I didn't pay much attention to them, but actually they were really important to making my, you know, to making my experience what it was, but also teaching a lesson, or teaching me about something that I've used now since since you've returned from your program.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like there's too many to count, really. And you know, I think and that is the work of teachers and AFS volunteers, is really goes unthanked sometimes. They put in hours and hours into the education and betterment of students around them, and I think students often take that for granted and just kind of go along their way and don't realize sort of the work that goes into recruiting and hosting and running the programs. And you appreciate that, you know, the older and older you get and the more and more you reflect on sort of your upbringing. So for me, I mean, there's a woman named Christina Lattis who worked to start the Spanish immersion programs in my community, and then really push for French immersion and a Chinese immersion. And she encouraged me to pursue the Chinese flagship program at my university, at Arizona State University, and, you know, go on as many study abroad programs as I could, and kind of highlighted some different scholarship opportunities that I could take. And then meeting Patrick, he has been an invaluable mentor for kind of navigating the federal government career track, and, you know, great places to apply to positions, and sort of what to do when you've been offered one, or what to do just on the path of working in government, and kind of what 5-year plan you should sort of start to develop as you're a new professional. So I think along the way, I have met so many mentors that have helped me get to the place that I am. I would never be in the circumstance that I am in now without the help of, you know, mentors who sometimes, unfortunately, probably go unthanked because they just put in the hours, and, you know, students take it for granted too often, I think.
Appreciate that.
Absolutely, just like her. And I had many mentors on my journey, and I had the privilege to work on their shoulders, starting with Honorable Edward Burdick, my late American father, and to Ambassador Harlan Cleveland and Brian Atwood at the University of Minnesota, and many other people I met on the way. And also my American family, the Johnson's family, my mom and my dad and my sister, Kristen, they became also a kind of, we don't seem to think it has an influence on your professional career, but they taught me how to be a kinder person, a loving person, and accept them. Even I was considered to be the pastor's runner in my community when I was there, and people called me a black bullet because I was the pastor's runner among white people behind me. So they have all kind of nicknames, and I try to do the skiing and snowmobiling, and that's kind of little things that the emotional infrastructure that coming from your host family and accepting, and you are part of their family, you know, I mean, even though your family is not there, they become your family. So that has a infrastructure that provided by that emotional support by our host families make a huge difference to us and to me. I don't know other cases, and I was in a way to blessed, and also the entire community of Perm. It is pretty much about 1,200 some people in a small community, but in the summer it is a resort town, and we still have a 50 miles radius. We have 1,000 lakes in that region in the northern Minnesota. You know, Minnesota is a 10,000 lakes. Right. But in my community has 1,000 lakes. So there is a community of people. We stay together and have a potluck parties Friday night and the weekend, and do the church event and other event with the Rotary Club and Lions Club. That makes some kind of infrastructure that we hardly recognize that have influence on our upbringing in our professional careers. This infrastructure, I think, is very important. I thought in my well-being, my having a family and friends away from my own family. So I think that was a very key part for me, and that's why that that connections still prevail. My mom is still in the nursing home, and I talk to her and see how she's doing, and I talk to my sister, and it's become part of your life,
Right. We all have that web of support, right? That we didn't actually always recognize, but value and are part of now. I think that's,
exactly
also the point.
And also we had a AFS chapter in my town, and also get together weekend, or the AFS, I have AFS uncle and aunt and AFS other families coming together. That also really helped me in those that's formative 1 year that changed the life.
I feel like we could have a conversation probably far into the night or the morning or the afternoon, depending on where you are situated in the world. But I am so thankful to both of you for sharing with us this evening, for our entire community here tonight, the AFS family who've come together to share in these stories of your success and your road forward, and appreciate the message of advocacy that you've brought to us, and the importance that you raise of making sure that our elected representatives, and you can, we can all do this. We can make sure that we share, as Robin mentioned, share the article that Dominique and Patrick wrote with our congressional representatives, and make a sort of personal story, share a personal story of how much it impacts our communities, our families, and what the long-lasting impact is. We really see that, over and over again. This is not an investment in one slice of time for one person, but rather a huge ripple effect that surrounds each of us before, during, and after. So really appreciate and thank you all for your time and attention this evening.
Thank you
very much.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good
thank
morning.
you so much.
Or good morning, good day.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you again.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow or later today. Bye.
Thank you. Very grateful to be here.
Bye-bye, Dominic.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Kerry.
Bye-bye. Nice meeting you.